Let's get to those questions now. This first one, Gigi, is for you. It's from YouTube, and it's from Kadobi1. Why was Melanie Boudreau-Pawlowski allowed to not testify, not allowed to testify? So we want to know from you, since you've been sitting in that courtroom where cameras were not allowed, what happened? Because everyone was looking forward to her testimony when they saw her walk into the courthouse.
Well, my understanding of that is that the prosecution simply decided not to call her. We don't know why. Her husband, Ian, as we know, did testify briefly. And the original question was whether or not she had watched any testimony or read any articles. Witnesses are not supposed to do that. He said she did scroll through some of those headlines after her ex-husband, Brandon Boudreau, testified. They're still tied up in litigation, so she was checking things out. I don't think that's the reason, because David Warwick, who's married to Melanie Gibb and was one of Lori's best friends, Melanie Gibb was, he watched testimony and he was allowed to testify. So I kind of think maybe it's an emotional wild card with her. She just thought Lori hung the moon, and maybe they just came down and said, we don't know what to expect with her on the stand. But she's not in contempt. She's not in trouble. She was told to leave, never released from that subpoena, but obviously never testified.
Well, and they may not have needed her. Maybe they felt like, you know what, we've done what we need to do, and we don't need her testimony. It could have been as simple as that. Paul S. asks, can you please discuss Lori's jail conditions and daily life there? Who is visiting her? What is she allowed to do? Kathy, do you have any information about that?
I don't have really any information about that, but I do not believe she's getting visitors. Gigi may have some more on that.
Gigi, let's, have you heard anything about it?
I don't think they have in-person visits there in Madison County. They do have the tablets where you can do the voice calls and the video calls with people that the inmate approves to receive those messages from. We haven't heard of anybody visiting her. Now, the jail she's at is very tiny. It's going to be a big difference if she's convicted and sent to prison. The food at this jail is supposed to be amazing. It's kind of quiet. It's small. Prison's going to be a big wake-up call, because she's going to be in there with a lot of women who do not like women who hurt their children.
Well, and if Lori indeed goes to prison, and it seems likely that she may, just based on the lack of defense in this case. I mean, obviously, we're not on the jury. Yeah, prison's a whole different ballgame. And, you know, she may be put in, you know, what they call administrative segregation or solitary confinement for her own protection. We saw that happen with Alec Murdaugh. You know, Linda, we've got a question here. Kadobi1 from YouTube asks, this is a good one for you. If convicted, could Lori claim ineffective assistance of counsel, since they really didn't put up much of a defense?
Oh, well, that's like $1 million question, any ineffective assistance of counsel. First, you have to go through generally your appeals, although you can attach to an appeal on the first go-round that your counsel was ineffective. But it's very, very difficult to win unless there is somebody who knew that she was specifically, you know, not involved in the deaths of her children, because that wouldn't apply really to the conspiracy count, because that's going to be an issue anyhow. But very, very, very difficult.
It's always a very high bar with ineffective assistance of counsel, you know, because they basically have to prove. It'll be on the defense if she's convicted. Her appellate attorneys will have to say the verdict would have been different had they done this, or X, Y, and Z, and blah, blah, blah. So very hard to get a verdict overturned based on that. This question is a good one for you, Kathy. I don't know if you know the answer, but you know, you are way in the weeds with this case. It's from Betty Bumbledust, and she asks, about the marks under JJ's fingernails, was there any testing to try and retrieve DNA, please? Also, thank you for the coverage of your case. We are glad to do it, Betty.
No, they couldn't get any DNA from underneath his fingernails, so none of that came into this trial.
Okay. We did hear about some other DNA evidence, though, if people recall, especially about the DNA from Lori's hair found on the duct tape on JJ, which was incredibly disturbing. Our next question will go to you, Gigi, and I think this is a good one for you, since you've been in the courtroom the entire time. live from my couch, reporting live from my couch, that's the name, asks, does Judge Boyce appear nervous with some of his rulings? He seems to have denied prosecution evidence a bit this week. Co-conspirator is already hard enough to prove. So what's Judge Boyce's demeanor been like?
Actually, he seems fine. I mean, the one thing I have noticed, he smiles a lot bigger after lunch. But for the most part, I haven't seen him really seem right, yeah. But I haven't seen him look nervous with rulings. I think he's really thinking things through before he rules, just to make sure her rights are upheld. But the things that were left out this week, it seems like they were argumentative. The slides that were going to be presented by the witnesses had a narrative to them, as opposed to just a straight timeline. So I see why those weren't allowed in. One was amended and brought in. The other one they just left out. But I have to say, the courtroom itself, this trial has run so smoothly, and there's been no hiccups. And, both sides have been respectful. There hasn't been any drama. So I think everybody's done a great job in making sure this trial runs effectively and efficiently.
That is a really good point that you make there, because we really haven't heard a whole lot of drama on those audio recordings. And obviously you're seeing what goes on in there every day. This is a good question for you, Linda. At Balanced Not from Twitter asks, could Lori's competency be called into question given how the defense didn't put on any defense? Is that a strategic move? And if so, does it benefit her?
Okay, so competency is really the issue of whether or not you can interact with your attorneys and understand the charges against you and stand trial. And there were times in her incarceration that both sides, both the scientific medical witnesses for both sides agreed that she was incompetent. But they then all agreed that she was competent to stand trial. Now, the other issue relates to that. That's the issue of insanity. Did she know right from wrong at the time that these crimes were committed? The problem with that is that Idaho does not have an insanity defense here, as we've seen in the recent case of Stout that we tried here on the network. So they really can't raise that issue in this regard. They can only raise it in regard to whether she have any mental capabilities or deficiencies in same to understand right from wrong back in 2019 when these crimes allegedly occurred.
Let's go now to a question. I'm going to basically ask all of you this question, go around the boxes, because I want to hear what all of you have to say. I know what I think about it. It's from Ramen Lover from YouTube. What kind of deal could be offered to Chad when Lori is found guilty? I should say when and if, but this viewer obviously thinks she will be found guilty. So Kathy, I'll start with you. Do you think there's any way they offer Chad Daybell a deal?
I think they could take death off the table if he would plead to it. I mean, this is costing a lot of money, and now they have to go a whole nother year before Chad goes to trial and then call the exact same witnesses and put on the exact same evidence. The interesting thing is Chad's attorney, John Pryor, has been attending almost every day in the overflow media room, so he has an inside look at all the evidence and how this is shaking out in front of those jurors. And he just may be at the end of this, if she's convicted, he may have a serious talk with Chad. Like, maybe we should go to the prosecution and try and make a deal. But, the death penalty, as many of us know, is often used as a plea bargaining chip. So, could happen.
Gigi, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Kathy. And I know, too, that I've had listeners and viewers of Law and Crime approach me and say I was in with Pryor or I could see him better in the courtroom. And when certain things were put up there that directly related to Chad, they said you could almost see the embarrassment on his face. And these things are going to come in his trial. So I agree with Kathy. If she's found guilty on this, maybe it's time for a talk about saving himself from potentially getting the death penalty. I've always heard the case against Chad was stronger than the case against Lori's, which has largely been circumstantial. So maybe, this front row seat has got the gears turning in John Pryor. We shall see.
We shall see for sure. Linda, your thoughts. Do you think there are any deals to be made when it comes to Chad Daybell?
It's interesting because we didn't really hear in this case who actually killed the children, right? We think it could be Chad, but we would have heard that. We think it could be Alex Cox, but maybe we would have heard that. So maybe the deal will be made because you had the grandparents of JJ in there, right? And we know that, one of them, Kathy and Gigi would know better, there was an ambulance calls. This has to be incredibly stressful on their mental health. And if they know that Chad will go to prison for the rest of his life, turn evidence on Lori in case she decides to appeal her conviction, maybe a deal will be had.
Yeah, I think the only deal that the prosecution, just my feeling on it, would be to take death off the table if he pleads to the murders, because we're talking about 2 children and a wife, his wife, murdered. I mean, I just can't even imagine them saying, oh yeah, plead to this and we'll let you out maybe in 30 years. I say no way. I think life without parole is probably the only deal to be had here. Just my opinion. So you heard it from all of us. We're going to take a quick break, but we want you to keep those questions coming to us. So we will be right back. Submit them on Twitter, Facebook, and in the YouTube chat. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you are watching the Lunch Show Q&A on Law and Crime.